The first meeting when it all began, time seemed to have a different rhythm in that small village forgotten by the world. There, where the streets were made of stone, the houses were simple with wooden windows decorated with flowers, and the sound of trains in the distance filled the dais. Everything was slower, more peaceful, purer. Life went on without any major surprises, without any emergencies. The children ran freely through the fields, unaware that, on the other side of the horizon, the world was beginning to change in a way that would soon reach even that small piece of land. It was on one of those summer mornings, when the smell of fresh bread mingled with the perfume of the garden flowers, that two eyes met for the first time. His name was Victor, she Alina, two common names, but together they would carry one of the most beautiful and painful stories that village has ever known. Victor was a boy with messy brown hair, a curious look and an easy smile. The son of a railwayman, he had grown up among the tracks, the whistles of trains, and the constant smell of oil and metal. He was one of those boys who climbed trees, ran barefoot, lived with scraped knees, but carried in his chest a rare kindness, the kind that you can't teach, you're born with it. Alina, in turn, was the daughter of the village seamstress, a girl with intense green eyes, which looked like water mirrors reflecting the world, and blonde hair that, when touched by the sunlight, shone like gold. She had a calm, observant manner, and a sweetness that made even animals feel safe around her. Wherever she went, it seemed like time was adjusting to be more beautiful, lighter. Their meeting was so simple, so everyday, that, at first glance, it seemed like just another one of the thousands of coincidences that life offers. But those who truly believe in chance have never understood the way destiny works. That day, Victor was running after a kite that had come loose from his older brother's hands. The strong wind carried her towards the field, passing through the village's central square, where Alina was helping her mother carry some fabrics. The stubborn kite spun in the air and landed right at her feet. Alina bent down, picked up the coiled thread, and when she looked up, there he was, panting, cheeks red, hands on his knees trying to catch his breath. And then, it happened. That kind of silence that doesn't embarrass, but fills. That moment when, even without understanding, two hearts recognize each other, as if they had always known that their paths were destined to cross. "I think this is yours," she said, extending her hand with the kite. Victor smiled, and it was such a genuine smile, so open, that for a moment the whole world seemed to fit into that gesture. "Thank you. I was almost giving up," he replied, scratching the back of his neck, a little embarrassed. And there he stood, standing still, not knowing if he should leave, if he should say something else, or if he should somehow turn that moment into something that would never end. "You run well," Alina commented, trying to hide her own nervousness, something rare for her. "And you," he hesitated, but added, "are good at saving kites in danger." They laughed. That light, childish laughter that spreads through the air and mixes with the sound of church bells, birds in the fields, and the train whistle in the distance. And in that laugh, the connection was formed, invisible to those looking from the outside, but absolutely palpable to both of them. From that day on, they were inseparable. They met every day in the square, at the lake, in the field near the tracks. They built huts out of branches, invented secret worlds, explored their surroundings as if they were pioneers of a universe all their own. They shared secrets, fears, dreams, and, without realizing it, they planted, day after day, the seeds of a love that would soon grow stronger than they could ever imagine. At first, the families thought it was funny. After all, they were just kids. But as the years passed, everyone in the village realized that this was not just a childhood friendship. It was something much bigger, something that neither time nor destiny, nor the world itself would be able to erase. And so, under the blue sky of that forgotten village, among the smell of fresh bread, the rusty rails and the flowers swaying in the wind, began a story that would not only be made of encounters ... but also of waiting, of longing, and of a love that, even when everything seemed lost, would refuse to die. Because, in that moment when Alina handed that kite to Victor, destiny silently signed the first chapter of a promise that would cross time, distance, and even war. The days that followed Victor and Elena's first meeting seemed to have been carefully designed by fate itself. From that moment on, there was not a single dawn in which they did not seek each other out. If it was sunny, they would run through the fields, hide in the cornfields, climb trees, dive into the lake. If it was raining, they would play barefoot in the puddles, laughing as if defying the sky itself to steal their joy. Life, at that time, seemed like an open book, with blank pages, waiting for the two of them to write their own story. And they wrote, not with pens or pencils, but with gestures, looks, laughter, and secrets exchanged under the old oak tree at the top of the hill, the place that, for them, was sacred. The old oak tree had become their meeting place. Its thick, firm roots formed a kind of natural seat where they sat side by side, looking out over the horizon, dreaming about what the future would hold. There, Elena taught Victor how to make flower crowns, while he taught her how to fly kites without them getting lost in the wind, a skill that, according to him, only a true master of the winds could possess. Every afternoon was an adventure. Sometimes they imagined themselves as pirates, sailing through unknown seas, using the village lake as an ocean. Other times, they were explorers, exploring mysterious forests, hunting for treasures that only existed in the fertile imagination of two children who, without knowing it, were building an invisible fortress against time, against destiny, and against the inevitable changes that life would bring. One day, when we grow up, we'll build a house right here, Victor said, pointing to the clearing next to the oak tree, a house of our own, with big windows to see the stars, and a vegetable garden, Elena added, smiling, arranging the flowers on her head, full of carrots, strawberries, and sunflowers. And we're also going to have a dog, and chickens, lots of chickens. They laughed as if they had no idea that, on the other side of the horizon, the world was slowly starting to burn. But at that moment, all that existed was that piece of sky, that field, those promises that, for them, were as real as the smell of wet grass and the sound of birds at dusk. The most beautiful thing of all was how they understood each other in silence. A look was enough for them to know what the other wanted. A shy, crooked smile was enough for words to become unnecessary. It was as if the entire universe had been organized just for them to meet, and they knew it. Even so young, they knew it. There were also secrets. Those secrets that you only tell to those you trust your soul with. Sitting side by side, their feet dangling over the bank overlooking the river, Elena confessed that she was afraid of thunder, and Victor, somewhat embarrassed, confessed that he was afraid of being alone when his father went on train trips, which sometimes lasted days. If you ever feel alone, she said, holding his hand, think of me. I'll be thinking of you too. Those small, intertwined hands were more than just a childish gesture. They were, in fact, a silent pact, an unspoken promise that, no matter what the future brought, they would always be connected, always together, even if, one day, the world tried to tear them apart. At village festivals, they danced hand in hand, twirling as if time were theirs alone. At harvest time, they helped their parents, sharing laughter and knowing glances. And on summer nights, they lay on the grass, looking up at the stars, creating imaginary constellations and naming them with their own names. That one over there will be called the Victor Star, she said, pointing to a bright spot in the sky, because it's the most beautiful. He smiled, a little awkwardly, looking more at her than at the sky, because, for him, no star could be more beautiful than Elena, but he didn't say it. He kept that thought to himself, like someone who keeps a treasure. Time was passing, but for them it seemed eternal. They did not know, could not imagine, that childhood, although magical, is also finite. That the golden days, the afternoons in the countryside, the laughter, and the secrets would one day become memories, memories so vivid and so painfully beautiful, that they would be, at the same time, consolation and longing. But in that moment, none of that mattered, because for Victor and Elena, all that existed was that pure, innocent, growing love, a love that neither they, nor the universe itself, would be able to measure. And, without them realizing, that love, born among secrets, laughter, and endless afternoons, began, silently, to prepare itself to face the greatest of all trials, a trial that would come in the form of silence, distance, and war. Time has a curious way of transforming things. It shapes faces, lengthens voices, changes ways, grows bodies, and, without anyone noticing, it also transforms looks. And so, silently, from one day to the next, or perhaps, without them even noticing, the look between Victor and Elena stopped being the innocent look of childhood, and became something much greater, Those two who, for years, ran through the fields, shared secrets under the old oak tree, and laughed until dusk, suddenly began to see each other in a different way. It was no longer just complicity, not just friendship. It was something that tightened your chest, that made your stomach twist, that made your heart race. Even in the simplest of encounters, everything began to change in small details. In the way Victor waited for her on the street corner, only to walk beside her to the square. In the care he took as he pushed a branch aside for her to pass. In the way he suddenly fell silent when she smiled, as if that smile could stop time. Alina understood too. She noticed when, suddenly, she found herself adjusting her hair in the reflection of the window before going to meet him. Or when, without realizing it, I would start looking for Victor among the faces at the fair, just to see him, even if it was from afar. Her heart seemed to beat differently when he was around, like it was stronger, more urgent. One time they were sitting on the bank overlooking the lake. It was late afternoon, and the orange-tinted sky was reflected in the calm waters. They talked about anything, about the neighbor's dog, about the kites they had lost in the wind, about the flowers that were beginning to bloom near the oak tree. And in the middle of the conversation, their eyes met. But this time, the world didn't start spinning like it always did. It was a long look, deep, and suddenly embarrassing. Because, at that exact moment, they both understood, without needing words, that something had changed. That the space between them, previously filled with laughter and jokes, was now occupied by something bigger, denser, more intense. Victor looked away first, looking at his hands, scratching the back of his neck, trying to hide the blush that was rising on his face. Alina smiled, that awkward smile, biting her lower lip, like someone who doesn't quite know what to do with her own hands, with her own body, with her own heart. That seemed to want to jump out of her chest. "You," he began, his voice breaking. "You look different." She arched an eyebrow, holding back a laugh. "Different? How?" Victor scratched his head, messing up his hair even more. "I don't know. It's just okay." Alina looked at the lake, took a deep breath, and replied, almost in a whisper, "You too." From that moment on, everything was different. There was no need for a kiss, a declaration, or anything grand. Because that day, under that golden sky reflected in the lake, they understood, deep down, what hearts are made of, that they were no longer just friends. They were much more than that. The meetings began to have a different flavor. Their hands sought each other more frequently, first timidly, almost accidentally, then naturally, as if holding each other was the most right thing they could do in the world. Conversations have changed in tone. Talking about the future is no longer a childish game and has become a real construction. "When I start working with my father on the trains," Victor said, holding her hand, "I'll save money so we can build that house in the countryside, the one we promised. And I'm going to open my sewing shop," Alina replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And we're going to have our vegetable garden and our sunflowers, ... Remember?" They smiled, they dreamed, they loved, and they didn't even realize that that love, which was born in the purest of friendship, was now the strongest, most alive and most beautiful thing they carried inside them. And, like all true love, there's also carried that beauty that only exists when it is born of time, of coexistence, of the slow construction of those who have known each other forever, of those who have seen the other grow, make mistakes, laugh, cry, and even so, chose to love. Their hands, when clasped together, looked like two pieces of a puzzle that always fit together. And if someone asked when they started loving each other, neither of them would know how to answer. Because, deep down, it seemed like it had always been that way. That was always there. And that, perhaps, the entire universe had been designed just so that, one day, they would meet and recognize each other. But the world outside was beginning to stir. The first news of a distant conflict began to blow like strange winds into the village. And without them knowing, that love so beautiful, so pure, so true was about to be put to the test in a way neither of them had ever imagined. Love, now, would have to learn to resist time, distance, war. Love has a peculiar way of transforming what was once just fantasy into concrete projects. And with Victor and Alina, it was no different. When their gazes stopped being merely complicit and became confessionals of love, the world began to be seen through a different lens, a lens where the future was no longer unknown territory, but rather a path that they dreamed of building together, step by step, hand in hand, sitting by the lake, under the old oak tree that witnessed the beginning of everything. They spent hours imagining the life they would have. On the horizon, they drew a simple house, made of wood, with large windows and white curtains swaying in the wind, a balcony full of flower pots, a garden with sunflowers that Alina loved so much, and a vegetable garden in the back, where they would grow carrots, tomatoes and fresh herbs. And we'll have a low fence, just for decoration, Alina said, smiling, her eyes shining, as she held a flower he had just placed in her hair, and a swing attached to the oak tree, for our children to play on. And a window here. Look, Victor drew on the ground with a twig, marking what would be the plan of the house. Very large, facing the sunset. So, every late afternoon, we will be able to sit on the porch, drink tea, and watch the day end together. She smiled. A smile that didn't fit on her face, that overflowed. That lit up everything around her. Because there, on that piece of ground, on that line of twig in the earth, was everything she needed, everything she wanted. There was love. There was the future. They talked about everything. About the furniture in the house, about the dog they were going to have, about the village festivals, the harvests, Christmases together, the children they would have to, maybe 3. She wanted a girl, he, a boy. But deep down, they knew that whatever the future held, as long as they were together, it would be perfect. Do you think it's possible to be like this forever? She asked once, looking at the horizon, leaning on his shoulder. Victor didn't have to think much. He squeezed her hand, looked into her eyes, and answered, with the conviction of someone who understands, even without understanding the world. If it depends on me, ... Yes, I'll make it happen, I promise you. And at that moment, he didn't know. She didn't know either. But that sentence, that promise made there, with no witnesses other than the wind and the old oak tree, would be the anchor that would keep them standing in the years to come. In difficult days, in the days when love would be all that was left. In the village, everyone already knew them as the oak couple. It was impossible not to notice. Wherever she was, he was, and vice versa. They walked hand in hand, exchanging glances, shy smiles, small touches that said much more than any words. They were two in one, 2 hearts, beating to the same beat, and little by little, his dreams became plans. Victor began to learn the trade from his father, train maintenance, track repairs, map reading. He dreamed of one day not only following in his father's footsteps, but also providing for the home he had planned to build with Alina. Alina, in turn, was already helping her mother with sewing. Her agile, delicate hands learned how to transform simple fabrics into beautiful pieces, full of details. And, between one line and another, she imagined the day when she would have her own store. A small shop, with a hand-painted wooden sign that would say, Alina Sewing, made with love. They also talked about traveling, about one day, perhaps, taking one of those trains that passed through the village and going further. Getting to know cities, seeing the sea, trying foods that they had only heard about. But, even dreaming of the world outside, they knew that their true home would always be there, on that piece of land, on that oak tree, in that love. The future, for them, was a straight line, clear, safe, a road without curves, where everything seemed possible, where time worked in their favor, where nothing could go wrong. But the world outside did not follow the same rules as they did. And while they drew windows, gardens and swings in the dirt, while they made promises and built dream castles, the muffled sound of a distant radio brought, more and more frequently, a word that until then seemed not to belong. There, war. At first it was just rumors, news that came in whispers, a country that had been invaded, an agreement broken, troops being mobilized. But, for them, that was as distant as the stars in the sky. It could not, should not, reach the world they were building together. But war, oh war, doesn't choose who it goes through. It comes like a strong wind, knocking down doors, tearing apart dreams, interrupting lives. And, without them knowing, those plans made under the oak tree, those promises whispered with closed eyes, were about to be put to the test in the cruelest way that love could imagine. Summer seemed to never end that year. The long days, illuminated by a golden sun, still lulled Victor and Alina into their plans for the future. The old oak tree remained a silent witness to every promise, every smile, every plan drawn on the earth, as if nature itself wanted to immortalize that love. But there was something strange about the wind, something they couldn't explain. It was as if the world, previously so predictable, began to breathe differently. In the village, the buzz grew. Conversations, previously about harvests, festivals, and seasons, now brought up words that until then had seemed too distant to be frightening. Conflict, troops, mobilization, borders, and one word, in particular, began to be repeated more than any other: war. The first time they heard about it was in the town square. The old grocery store radio, normally used to broadcast music, agricultural news, and sometimes a play, now carried a serious, deep voice, full of tension. The army has been mobilized. Tensions are rising on the borders. Men are being called up. Victor and Alina, who were walking hand in hand, stopped and exchanged glances. The tightness in their chest was immediate, but, like every young man in love, stubborn and full of hope, Victor tried to minimize it. "That's something grown-ups do," he said, squeezing her hand. "They fight. They work things out. It won't get this far." But deep down, they both knew that something was different this time. The tone of conversation in the village had changed. The markets were quieter. The old men gathered on the benches in the square, looking out at the horizon, as if listening to the wind more than to their own words. The women whispered at the windows, holding their children in their arms, looking at their husbands with a mixture of love and concern. At Victor's house, his father, a railway worker, began arriving later. The train lines were busier than ever. Cars were carrying soldiers, supplies, weapons. The sound of train whistles, which had once been part of the village's soundtrack, now sounded different, heavier, more urgent, more frightening. "It's happening," the father murmured one night, sitting at the table, looking at his plate but not really seeing the food. "It's real, and it won't be long before it knocks on our door." Victor, who had been trying to remain optimistic until then, felt his stomach sink. That world that seemed so safe, so predictable, began to fall apart in his hands. Alina felt it too. The sewing in her mother's shop, which had previously been done to the sound of light conversation, was now done in silence, interrupted only by the sound of needles piercing fabric, and, sometimes, by the heavy sighs of women who came in to mend a garment, or to cry, surreptitiously, on each other's shoulders. Their encounters changed, not in love, nor in intensity, but in urgency. Each embrace seemed longer, each look deeper, as if, deep down, even without saying it, they knew they were living the last days of a peace that would not return anytime soon. One afternoon, as they sat in the oak tree, Alina held Victor's hand so tightly that it hurt. "Do you think they'll call you?" he asked, his voice breaking. Victor was silent. He looked at the horizon where the sun was hiding behind the mountains, dyeing everything golden, as if the world itself was trying to somehow soften that moment. "I don't know," he finally answered, swallowing the lump that was forming in his throat. "But if it happens, I'll go, and I'll come back. I swear I'll come back." She held his face with both hands, forcing him to look into her eyes. "Will you promise me? Will you promise to come back to me?" He pressed her hands against his chest, where his heart was beating so hard, it felt like it wanted to tear his own flesh. "I promise, I'll come back. Whatever it is. Whatever happens, I'll come back to you." The wind blew harder, carrying away the leaves, the scents, the promises spoken and unspoken. And though they tried to hold on to the present, there was a heaviness in the air that they could no longer ignore. In the following days, posters began to appear in squares, on the doors of the town hall, at the train station. Calls for volunteers, call-up lists, and with them, the inevitable, the certainty that love, life, plans, everything, was about to be put to the test. Their love would now have to resist not only time, but also distance, not only waiting, but also fear, not only absence, but also the silence that war brings. Because when war comes, it doesn't ask permission. It just comes in, it tears, it takes, and all that's left are promises, memories, ... and hope. Uncertainty is a kind of ghost, invisible, but heavy. It occupies spaces, invades silences, transforms days into hours, and hours into seconds that seem to slip through your hands without being able to hold them. And that is exactly how Victor and Alina began to live. Like someone racing against a clock that they don't know when it will stop, but that, somehow, they know ... it will stop. After the first posters were put up, the village stopped being that safe haven that seemed to exist outside the world. The sound of children playing was replaced by the creaking of doors closing early. Conversations at the fair, previously filled with laughter and simple stories, became whispers, full of fear, speculation, and assumptions that, often, would rather not be said out loud. And in the middle of this scene, there they were, two young people who, until recently, were drawing futures under the old oak tree, planning a lifetime together. Now, they found themselves forced to live like someone in a hurry to love, in a hurry to be together, in a hurry to cherish every second like someone who knows that, at any moment, destiny could take it all away. Their meetings became more intense, longer, more filled with silences that said more than any words. They walked through the village, no longer talking about what the house in the country would be like, or how many children they would have. Now, they talked about if they would have that, about when and if all of this would pass, about how to make their love survive what was coming. "I wish time would stop," Elena whispered once, her head resting on Victor's shoulder, watching the sunset tint the sky orange and gold. "I wish this moment would never end." He squeezed her hand tightly, tight enough that she knew that even if the whole world fell apart, he would still be there, at least, as long as he could. "Then let's make the time count," he replied, turning his face to look into her eyes. "Every second, every minute, until I have to go." Elena held back her tears. She had learned, in those days, that there were tears that needed to be held back, not because she didn't want to cry, but because she knew that if she started, she might never stop. They started doing little things that didn't seem to matter that much before. They woke up early to watch the sunrise together. They took bread and fruit to picnics in the countryside, even for no reason. They wrote letters to each other, even though they saw each other every day. It was a way of ensuring that if words were missing in the future, they would at least be recorded on paper. "If one day, I can't tell you," Elena said, handing him one of the letters, "you can open this, and remember." He held the envelope as if it were made of glass. "I'll write to you too, every day, from wherever I am." His voice faltered at the end of the sentence, but he took a deep breath and added, "Because I'll come back, Elena, I swear, I'll come back to you." The old oak tree, which had previously been the scene of innocent childhood promises, now witnessed much more serious promises, more painful, more urgent. They began to look at each other differently, with that look of someone who wants to memorize every feature, every detail, the shape of her smile, the line of her jaw, the way her hair was blowing in the wind, the sound of his laughter, which now seemed more precious than ever, because, deep down, they knew that love is also made of memory. And, when the body cannot be present, it is memory that keeps the flame of hope alive. There was also an unspoken fear, a fear they refused to put into words, as if saying it would make it too real, the fear that this would be their last sunrise together, their last hug, their last kiss, the last time she would see the way his eyes narrowed when he smiled, the last time he would smell her hair when he held her. But still, they chose to love, they chose to live. They chose to make the present a place where the future did not yet exist, where the only thing that mattered was that moment, that look, that touch. And while the world outside was moving ever faster towards the abyss of war, they held each other like someone holding their own heart, like someone who knows that love, when it is true, does not need guarantees. It does not need promises that fit on paper. It only needs two hearts willing to beat in time, even when time is running out. Even when everything seems to be falling apart. Because when you truly love, living as if time were running out is not a choice, it is resistance. What everyone feared has arrived. It was a morning like any other, or so it seemed. The smell of freshly baked bread mingled with the scent of the flowers Elena had tended the day before. The sound of church bells in the background and the rumble of distant railroad tracks filled the air, as they always did. But today, there was something different. Something that made even the wind blow louder. Even the birds seemed quieter. In the town's central square, a group began to form. First, some men. Then, women wearing aprons hurriedly left the house, holding their children's hands. The growing murmur was like a wave about to break. And then the sound of boots on the stone floor announced what no one wanted to hear. Two soldiers, coming from the city, accompanied a man with a leather briefcase in his hands. He walked to the square's mural, opened the briefcase, and, with firm fingers, stuck a sheet of paper on it. a sheet of paper that seemed to weigh more than the world itself. The summons. Alina, who was walking towards her mother's sewing, felt her body freeze when she saw the movement. Her heart raced, as if it wanted to escape from her chest. Her legs weakened, and for a moment, everything around her went silent. Only the sound of the paper being nailed, the hammer hitting the wood, reverberated in her ears. The paper had names on it. Names of children, of husbands, of brothers, of loves. Names that, until that day, belonged to a village that dreamed, that loved, that built lives, and that would now be taken away by war. Alina didn't need to get closer. She knew, she felt it before she even saw it. But even so, with shaking hands, she walked over to the bulletin board. She read it line by line, and there it was, the fifth name on the list, written in a cold, impersonal way. But for her, it was everything. Viktor Ivanovich Mikhailov. The world, at that moment, seemed to collapse. Her legs gave way. The tears came without her being able to stop them. It was as if, suddenly, all her dreams, all her plans, all her smiles, had been torn apart, trampled on, thrown to the wind. Viktor was at the station, helping his father on the tracks, when one of the boys ran up to him, panting. Viktor, ... the list. Your name is there. The blood drained from his face. His hands, which were holding the wrench, were shaking. He dropped everything, ran down the path, cut through the field, and when he reached the square, he saw Alina sitting on the bench, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking from crying so much. He ran to her. Alina, ... he called, breathless. She lifted her face. Her eyes were watery, red, swollen. And in that moment, when they looked at each other, there was no need for words. They both knew, they both felt, the life they knew ended there. Viktor sat down next to her. He held her in his arms so tightly that it seemed he wanted to fuse her to his own body, as if trying to protect her from the world, from time, from destiny, from everything. It's okay, ... He lied, his voice breaking, holding her face between his hands. I'm going, but I'll be back. I promise, I'll come back to you. I always come back to you. Alina shook her head, squeezing him tightly. No, ... It's not fair, ... It can't be. Her voice was broken, almost a whisper, almost a scream stuck in her throat. We had plans, we had a life. Viktor, no, don't leave me, ... He held her face once more. He rested his forehead against hers. He took a deep breath. I won't leave you, never, not now, not later, not when I'm not here, because, even if I'm far away, Alina, ... I'll be with you. I promise you, I'll come back. But deep down, they both knew that promise was a desperate attempt to hold on to a world that was already beginning to fall apart. The rest of the day was a blur, a mix of tears, hugs, holding hands, long silences, and looks that said more than any words could. They didn't talk about war. They didn't talk about fear. They only talked about themselves, about love, about everything they had built, and, more than anything, about everything they still wanted to build. The sunset that afternoon seemed different, more golden, longer, as if the sky itself understood that this was a farewell, not of bodies yet, but of a life, of a peace that would not return so soon. That night, under the old oak tree, they were silent, sitting side by side, hands clasped, looking up at the sky. They didn't need to speak, because when two hearts love each other deeply, silence is also love. Silence is also a promise. And as the wind blew, carrying away leaves, memories and sighs, one thing became clear to both of them. Love would now have to learn to survive the greatest challenge of all. Love would now have to resist war. The clock seemed to mock them that night. Each moving pointer was like a slow, cruel, inevitable stab. They knew that when the sun rose, life would change forever. The train would leave, and with him, he would take not only Viktor, but a part of Alina, a part of everything they had built up until then. The world seemed suspended. The voices of the village fell silent. The lights in the houses seemed dimmer. Even the wind, which normally blew strongly across the countryside, seemed to respect that heavy silence, that anticipated morning that hung in the air. Viktor knocked on Elena's door early in the evening. There was no need for an invitation, not even words. She was already expecting it. He opened the door, and for a few seconds, they just stared at each other. And in that look, there was everything: the pain, the fear, hope, and above all, love. They walked hand in hand, walking to the old oak tree, the same place that, since they were children, was their refuge, where they made promises, where they dreamed, where they designed a whole life together. And now, in that same place, they had to do something much more difficult: learn to say goodbye without saying goodbye. They sat on the lawn, as they had so many times before, but they didn't speak. They didn't need to. They just sat there, looking at the sky, listening to the sound of their own hearts, which were beating fast, out of rhythm, as if they didn't know whether they should speed up or stop. Victor took her hand, bringing it to his lips, and gave her a long kiss, full of everything that words could no longer say. Alina rested her head on his shoulder, closed her eyes, and let the silence speak for both of them. "I don't know what it's going to be." Like Alina, his voice came out low, choked, almost a whisper. "I don't know what awaits me, ... But there's one thing I know, that I'm sure of. I love you, more than anything in this world, more than life itself." She squeezed his hand tighter. The tears flowed, silent, hot, burning her skin as if trying to leave marks of the pain she felt. "I love you too," he replied, his voice broken but firm. "And I will wait, as long as it takes. In whatever way it takes, I will wait for you, Victor." He took a small piece of ribbon from his pocket, worn and faded, but worth its weight in gold to him. It was the same ribbon Alina had worn in her hair years ago, at the first village festival they had attended together as children. "I want you to have this," he said, placing the ribbon in her hands. "That way, even though you're far away, you'll know that a part of me is here, with you." She held that ribbon against her chest, as if holding a piece of her own soul. Time seemed to speed up, as if the cruel universe wanted that night to end quickly, as if it wanted to rip away that last piece of peace from them. And, realizing this, they understood that they could not waste another second. Victor held Elena's face between his hands, looked deep into her eyes, and without saying a word, kissed her. It was a kiss unlike any other. It wasn't a goodbye kiss, nor a goodbye kiss. It was a kiss of resistance, of struggle, of love that refuses to be broken, even when everything around it seems to want to destroy it. And that night, they made their love not only a refuge, but also a living promise, a fortress against fear, against silence, against war. They gave themselves to each other, not as those who fear tomorrow, but as those who understand that, when you truly love, love knows no time, it knows no distance, it knows no end. When their bodies met, when their hands slid over their skin, when their sighs mingled, there was no more world, there was no more war, there was no more clock. There was only them, there was only love. And in that tight hug, that touch, that look, they left imprinted in each other's souls everything they would need to survive the days to come. Because when you are not sure about the future, all you can do is ensure that the present is so intense, so real, so full of love, that it becomes eternal in your memory. Dawn was approaching. The first colors of the sky began to draw on the horizon what would be the most difficult day of their lives. But, before they got up, before facing the inevitable, Victor looked into Elena's eyes and made one last promise. "I'll come back, Elena. I'll come back for you. Whatever it is, whatever happens, I'll come back." She held his face, kissed his forehead, and answered with a choked but certain voice, "I'll be here, waiting for you, until the last day of my life, if necessary." And so, hand in hand, with tears in their eyes and heavy hearts, they left the oak tree behind. And as they walked, they knew that from then on, each step would be heavier, more difficult, more painful. Because when love speaks louder, even the silence of farewell screams. The sound of a train whistle has never sounded so cruel. The station was unrecognizable that day. The place that had so often been the scene of happy departures and arrivals now became the stage for pain, uncertainty, and farewells that were uncertain whether they would be temporary ... or permanent. Men in uniform, carrying simple suitcases, tried to hide their fear behind serious faces. Women held handkerchiefs to their faces, as if that would be enough to hold back the tears that insisted on falling. Children held their parents' arms tightly, not quite understanding what was happening, but feeling in their souls that something very wrong was about to happen. Victor held Elena's hand tightly, and even though he tried to stay strong, the tightness in his chest felt almost physical, crushing his ribs, stealing his breath. Each step up to the platform sounded heavier, slower, as if his own body wanted to refuse to go. Alina walked beside him in silence. Her fingers intertwined with his trembled, but she refused to let go. Her gaze fixed on the ground, she tried to avoid the inevitable, looking around and seeing the other women, the other families, the other loves, also being torn from each other, like pieces of a life being torn apart without mercy. When he reached the platform, Victor dropped his suitcase on the ground. He turned to her, and in that exact moment, when their eyes met, the entire world disappeared. There were no more voices, there were no more soldiers, there was no more station. There were just the two of them, and the pain that, silently, seemed to scream inside his chest. Alina ... The voice came out low, choked, trembling. She squeezed his hand even tighter, as if trying to hold on to her own destiny. And before he could say anything, she interrupted him. Don't say it like it's goodbye ... Don't say it. Don't make it seem like it is. And the tears held back until then, finally broke, running down her face, falling to the ground, mixing with the dust and the smell of smoke from the trains. Victor held her face between his hands, squeezing it gently, lovingly, desperately. His thumbs ran across her cheeks, wiping away tears that, even if he wiped them away 1,000 times, would insist on coming back. It's not goodbye. It never will be. His voice cracked, and he had to take a deep breath before continuing. I'll be back, Alina. For God's sake, I'll be back. For you, for us, I'll be back. She held his arms, squeezing, trembling, and, in the middle of crying, between sobs, she shook her head. Promise, Victor ... Promise me ... He rested his forehead against hers, closed his eyes, held her hands against his chest, and, feeling his heart beating so hard it seemed ready to burst, he replied, I promise, I'll come back. No matter what, I'll come back too. You always. The train whistle sounded again, long, sharp, like a blade piercing the silence. Soldiers began to say goodbye in a hurry, throwing suitcases into the carriages, hugging their families, some holding back tears, others unable to hold back any longer. Victor knew time was running out, and yet, even with all that chaos, he grabbed Alina by the waist, pulled her towards him, and kissed her. A kiss that wasn't a goodbye, it was life, of love, of eternity. A kiss that said everything. They didn't have time or enough words to say. When their lips parted, she held his face, desperate. Don't forget me. Don't forget ... Never. He held both sides of her face, looking deep into her eyes, almost as if he wanted to record every feature, every detail, every nuance. I'll take you with me, here. And he took her hand to his own chest, where his heart was racing. Forever. Always. The whistle sounded for the third time. The engineer shouted. The soldiers began to board. Time, which seemed to want to give them a few more seconds, now became merciless. I ran, I fled, I dragged everything along. Victor picked up the suitcase, but didn't let go of her hand until the last moment. He walked backwards, looking at her, holding her, squeezing her, until, when he already had one foot in the carriage, he had to let go. Needed, because life, sometimes, demands of us what hurts the most. And in that instant, letting go of her was like ripping his own heart out of his chest. She stood on the platform, the ribbon in her hands, clutched to her chest, watching as he boarded the train. And when he turned at the carriage door, their eyes met one last time. And, in the midst of tears, she smiled. Weak, painful, but she smiled. Because, sometimes, loving is also knowing how to smile, even when the world falls apart. The train began to move, slowly at first, then faster, and when it disappeared around the bend, taking Victor and hundreds of other men with it, the silence on the platform was so loud it was like screaming. Alina stood there, still, her hands clutching her chest, her gaze lost in the horizon. And, in the midst of that emptiness, only one thing made sense. A single certainty echoed within her. I will wait, as long as it takes, all the time. I will wait for you to come back. The sound of the train had been gone for minutes, maybe hours, but to Alina, it still seemed to echo inside her, as if that long, sharp, cruel whistle had gotten stuck somewhere between her chest and her throat, reverberating, reminding her, every second, that it was gone, that it was gone, that it was gone. But if Victor's body followed tracks she couldn't reach, love, not love, love remained, rooted, tattooed, embedded inside her, like a root impossible to pull out. She stood on the platform, motionless. She didn't know if her feet had forgotten how to move, or if it was her soul that simply refused to let go. Because somehow it felt like if she moved, if she took even one step, she would be, in effect, accepting that he was gone, that he was no longer there, that he was no longer holding her hand. The other women also began to disperse. Some were supported by relatives, others were alone, dragging with them empty looks and hands pressed against their chests, as if they wanted to physically hold on to what was left of their loves. There was a mixture of pain, emptiness, and a hope on their faces that, however cruel it was, refused to die. That world seemed quieter, slower, heavier. Even the wind seemed to carry the smell of longing now, a smell that cannot be described, but that anyone who has ever loved someone who has left recognizes immediately. It is the smell of emptiness, of almost, of what if, of when they will return. Alina, after a time that not even she herself could measure, took the ribbon that Victor had given her and tied it around her wrist, as if tying a promise, as if making that piece of fabric something much bigger than it actually is. It was no longer just a ribbon, it was a thread, a tie, a reminder that, even if the tracks took his body, love would remain. He then started walking back home, but each step seemed harder than the last. The streets, once full of life, now looked different. Miners, more ashes, as if the world itself had understood that, from then on, colors would no longer make as much sense. She passed by the square where they had been together so many times, where they had shared laughter, secrets, dreams. She looked at the bench under the tree and, for a second, she could almost see him there, smiling, waiting for her. But when she blinked, there was only emptiness, only the bench, only absence. And that's when he understood. The love remained. Yes, it did. But the love that remains, when the one you love leaves, weighs heavily. And it weighs so much that sometimes it seems like it wants to crush you. But at the same time, it's this love that keeps you going, that prevents despair from winning, which makes getting up the next day, despite everything, possible. When he got home, he went straight to his dresser. He picked up an empty notebook, one of those he had never dared to use, and opened it to the first page. At the top, he wrote, "Para Victor," and then he started writing. "Today you left, and I felt, for the first time, what it's like to have my heart divided in two. Half went with you, half stayed here, with me. I promised I would wait, and I will, as long as it takes, until I no longer have the strength, because you are not just the love of my life, you are life itself." She closed the notebook, pressed it to her chest, and for the first time since he left, she cried. Not that contained, tight, silent cry, but that cry that comes from the gut, that tears, that hurts more than any physical wound, that seems to want to rip out one's very soul. But when the tears began to dry, a certainty took hold of every part of her. He was going to come back, because their love was not just any love. It was not a love from a storybook, nor a love from a paper novel. It was a love from the roots, from the blood, from the soul, the kind that neither time nor distance nor war can destroy. The old oak tree, in the distance, seemed to be waiting too. Its leaves swayed in the wind, as if waving, as if holding that love within itself. After all, it had seen everything, from the first look, from the first smile, from the first promise, and now, it would also be a witness to the waiting. From that day on, Alina would wake up every day with the same routine. Look at the horizon, count the days, write in the notebook, keep memories, and wait, because, even though the train had left, love remained. And it was this love that, from then on, would guide her every step, every sigh, every prayer, and deep down, she knew that if there is something capable of crossing time, distance, and even war, that something is called love. But this story is still far from over, because, while he faces the horror of war, she fights a very different battle, the battle against silence, against absence, against the longing that corrodes, that tightens, that hurts, and that, sometimes, is even crueler than the war itself. If you thought this story was already strong up to this point, get ready, because in the second part, you will feel the weight of waiting. You will understand what it is like to live counting the days, the hours, the minutes, waiting for someone who may never come back. So, don't miss it. The second part of this story will move you in a way you never imagined. Sign up now, turn on notifications, because the next part ... will make you cry. This will make you think, and, above all, it will make you believe that, when love is true, not even war is capable of destroying it.